Welcome to my little prairie home. I'm Robin Miller, and today we're going to be making salt pork with pan-fried gravy. Salt pork was a favorite of the pioneers. It's not exactly the healthiest of foods. It doesn't have a whole lot of modern day applications except for in recipes such as Boston clam chowder and New England clam chowder. Both of them can use it. And other than that, there's not a whole lot of people eating it right now. It's not terrifically good for you in a lot of ways, but it was a staple food, very much like bacon. Bacon is a smoked product. It doesn't need to be refrigerated. It could just be carried as is. Salt pork was chunks of pork, very fatty pork, that were brined in a very salty brine, and it made it last for a long time. It usually sold in barrels, and it has a lot of salt in it, and that's why it's called salt pork. It can be found now. Hormel, for example, sells one. This is a package of it. This particular version did come sliced. It often comes in one slab, and they're usually about this size. So people chunk it up into cubes and put it in their chowder and a few other recipes. For what we're going to be using today, it was nice that it was already sliced, but you can buy it as a chunk and slice it yourself. It does look a lot like bacon. This is probably the meatiest salt pork I've ever seen. It usually is mostly fat and just a little streak of meat or a couple streaks of meat. So this is actually very, very lean. And it is not smoked. It is just very salty because it was preserved in a salt brine. So the first thing you're going to need to do is to get some of that out. All the ingredients you're going to need are very, very simple. We're going to make the salt pork and the gravy that goes with it. Don't tell your cardiologist on me. The salt pork is obviously the major ingredient. We're also going to use flour to dredge it in, which is about half a cup. We're going to have 4 cups of milk to make the gravy. You will season it with some pepper. You probably will not season it with any salt because obviously it's a very salty food already. We need some water to parboil it. And the utensils you'll need is the pan, the measuring cup, a whisk, a fork, and a spoon, and the tongs, and that's really it. It's a very simple food to make. It takes a little bit of time, but it's really easy to make. Again, it's not something that you're probably going to add to your repertoire of recipes, but it is interesting. It is a step back in time and to see how the pioneers ate and what they ate. Of course, they did a whole lot more physical labor than we did on a daily basis, and they did not have central heating, so their bodies did burn a whole lot more calories. So this wasn't as big of a deal to them as it is to us. So eat it sparingly, but we're going to get started right now just to show you the recipe for fun. I've layered all of the salt pork in the pan, and you just put it in a plain pan because right now we're just going to parboil it. You'll take water and to cover by about halfway up the edge of the pan. You want it well covered because the more water, the more hopefully the salt will come out. And then we're just going to put it on the stove, and we're going to parboil it. We're going to bring it up to the boil, from cold water to boil, and then we're going to boil it. Some people say just a minute, and I have that in my recipe on the website, mylittleprairiehome.com, but I'd go a couple minutes just to make absolute sure that you've got as much salt out as possible because there's nothing like eating a too salty food. So we're going to go to the stove right now, and we're going to parboil it, and then we're going to do the next step. So we have our pork, our salt pork boiling. It's been boiling for a minute or two, and you can see it's changed color, and it's getting less translucent. There's a lot of cloudiness in the water, and I'm not sure what it's called. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of a white sludge that gets produced when you do this step. It's not particularly attractive, but it's not going in your food because it's going to be thrown away, so it's all right. Once you have had it up to the boil, and again, parboiling is, for those of you who don't know, is it's basically partial boiling. You do it with vegetables when you want to roast them, or sometimes potatoes when you want to cook them off in another way. It's just partially boiling, and it differs from blanching. Blanching, you do this and then you immediately put it in cold water to stop the cooking. We're not going to do that because we're going to immediately continue cooking it. So that's why it's called parboiling, which is partial boiling. Now that we've got our pork done to where we want it to be, and we're hoping that a lot of the salt is gone now, we're going to just take it out, and what I like to do, you can put it into a colander. Some people just dump it all into a colander. I like to just put it immediately onto paper towels, and I'm not sure why, it's just something I want to do. And I kind of rinse them as I go so that there's none of that white sludgy stuff. Just take my tongs, rinse them off a little bit, drain them, and then I put them on my paper towel, and then I'll blot them drier before we go to the dredging step. But I just do them one by one so that they're a little bit cleaner. You can do this, and most people do this in a cast iron pan. I chose this particular skillet just simply because it's heavy bottomed and it's bigger than my cast iron one. But a lot of people do it in the cast iron to be traditional, just like Ma and Pa Ingalls would have. Well, Ma would have. But I like this one just because it's bigger. So once we get these all taken out and blotted dry, we're going to move to the next step, which is just dredging and frying them. So now we have our parboiled pork dried. We blotted it dry with paper towels. It's ready to be dredged. I've just added a little bit of pepper to my ½ cup of flour. And all you do to dredge is take a piece of your parboiled salt pork, put it in the pan, turn it over, and then you shake off whatever's not sticking, and you lay it in the pan. And that is literally it. Some people will put a bit of oil or bacon fat or pork fat in the pan. You can do that if you want to, but salt pork is incredibly fat as it is, and so it will render, and it will render pretty quickly. So unless you have a pan that you know really sticks, you don't need to. But even if you do put something in the pan, make sure it's not that much. Otherwise you're going to be boiling your salt pork in oil, because it will render a lot of fat. You're going to do about 8 minutes on either side, on both sides, excuse me, because it takes a long time to render all that fat out and get it nice and crisp. If your pan doesn't hold all of it at once, just keep adding as you can and flipping over and making sure it's really well crisp. It's cooking well on a low heat. You don't want it to be too high. You want to keep it low, because that way it will render instead of burn. So you keep that as low as you possibly can, and yet still sizzling. Not popping, but sizzling. And you do that with all of your pork. Once you have got something crispy, put it in a warm oven and keep going. And then the next step, after all of your pork is done, is to make the pan gravy. This is a close-up of the salt pork frying. You can see that it is browning. You can see it's shrunk up quite a bit, and you probably can see there's a whole lot of fat that has been rendered out so far. It just bubbles up, like you can see on several of those pieces, and renders and renders and renders until it's probably about a half of its original size. What Ma Ingalls would have done with the fat is to pour off all but a couple of tablespoons and save the fat that she didn't need for making pan gravy, and she would have used it for butter. I don't know that we need that, but you can save it and use it in place of oils in a variety of uses. So if you are not averse to pork fat, it actually can add flavor and can be used in a variety of ways. But that is what it looks like. We're getting close to the next stage, where we're also gonna stay with a close-up so that you can see how pan gravy is made. Once all of your salt pork is brown and crisp, just remove it to a paper-lined, either a pan or a platter of some kind, draining as you go. And you'll probably be left with, I'm going to go ahead and pop that into a warm oven to keep it warm while we make the gravy. You're probably going to have, in the bottom of the pan, you probably end up with close to ½ a cup of oil, depending on what kind of salt pork, how lean, how fat, how much you use. What you want left is about 2 or 3 tablespoons left in the pan. What you have over that, just spoon it out into a heat-proof dish and set it aside. You can either dispose of it later or use it for some other purpose. And then you want to make the gravy. With the heat still on low, you're going to take the leftover flour that you dredged in, and you're just going to take a spoon and sprinkle it over the flour, over the fat, and you're going to do it until you don't want a paste, and you don't want it runny, so you want just enough so that It's as much flour as you can kind of incorporate into that fat and still have it sort of be semi-liquid. See, it looks like close. See, it kind of bubbles up. It's still a little bit liquid, so go ahead and add a little bit more. This is really a judgment call. It so depends on your own pan and how much fat you've rendered. There's really no precise measurement in this, which for bakers is a frustrating thing, but this isn't baking. So basically, we're almost there. Once you get enough flour so that it's still slightly liquid, but it's not really able to be running all over the pan, then you just want to cook that flour out. And all that means is you keep stirring, scraping up all the brown bits in the bottom, and you want to cook it enough so that the flour kind of loses its raw taste. And that basically takes, I don't know, a couple minutes. Just on your low heat. There we go. See, it's almost running. I could almost get it to run, but it's not a thick paste. So that's about perfect. And what you're doing is basically just cooking off the flour. It gives it, browning flour gives it a rich nutty taste, so you definitely want to do that. And after you cook it for a couple minutes, we're going to add the milk. So that will be our next step. Now we have gotten our flour to a nice golden brown color, and it's cooked out all the raw flavor of the flour. For those of you who cook a lot, just made a roux with the fat in the flour, and it's not a dark brown roux, it's kind of a medium roux. It's definitely not blonde. You want a little bit more of cookout than that, but it's definitely not dark brown either, so we're not making gumbo or jambalaya or anything. When we're at this stage, you're going to be adding your milk and whisking, and that's really all that's left. It will thicken. That's what the roux does, that's what the flour does. But you want to keep stirring until it's the thickness you want. If you think it's a little thin, add a little bit more milk. If you think it's a little thick, just simmer it out and the milk will evaporate and you'll get a thicker product. And you'll just add it and it's going to make a sizzle. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I start with probably 3 cups of the milk. I'm sure I'm going to add some more, but for right now I'm going to do that and then just simmer on that low heat that you've had, stirring constantly. You're also going to wait until it's thickened and then you're going to taste it. Now, there's a couple different kinds of salt pork. One is the dry cured version and one is the brine version. I find the one that is the dry cured is a little less salty. So if you do parboil it first, which you have to do to make it palatable, you often lose so much of the salt that at this stage you're actually going to put salt back into your gravy. The brine version, I find most of the time, will be a little more salty, even when you parboiled it, so you don't need to add any to your gravy. It's up to you which one you buy. They're both pretty much processed the same, and it is definitely a matter of taste when you get to this stage. You just cook it out until it's the thickness you want, stirring to make sure you incorporate all the roux that you just made, and then you taste for seasoning. It should be fairly thick, not a real runny gravy. It should be fairly thick, and we'll see it when it's all done. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and cook it out. You make the decision. And somebody has asked me before, what size when you get the block of salt pork, when you get it not sliced, not pre-sliced, how thick do you want it? And I think that you don't want it shaved, you don't want it paper thin. You want it basically like regular bacon, not thick cut bacon, but the regular sliced bacon, because that enables, when you're parboiling it, to get more of the salt out, and you get a nice crispy rendered fat, as much fat as you can get out of it. So it's a nice crispy product when you're finally finished with it. The thicker you are, the less salt you're going to be able to leach out, and it just gets kind of tough and chewy. So just aim for regular bacon thickness, not thinner than that, and definitely not thicker. Our gravy is thickened beautifully. I've tasted it, and because I used the the dry cured salt pork this time, it did actually need a little salt in the gravy, which is again unusual. But it's better to need to add it than to have it over salty, so don't skip any steps. You can always add a little bit of salt later. You can never take it away at this stage. And it is completely ready. It's thick and yet pourable. So it's just about that consistency. And all you need now is to take some of your salt pork and you just ladle some of the gravy over, and that is the finished product. The gravy works great over potatoes, mashed potatoes, any kind of meat that you have left over. It's a great gravy because it does make a lot of gravy. And it is, again, a high caloric food. It's not something you're going to want to eat a lot, but if you want to taste a little bit of history, this is definitely something that most pioneer settlers had on their table at least once a day and sometimes for months on end. So that is a little bit of history. You can find this and many other pioneer recipes on our website, which is mylittleprairiehome.com. We have a lot of other information there, so stop by and visit us, and we'll see you soon.